There are mysteries that fade with time, cases that gather dust in forgotten archives. And then there are the ones that refuse to die, the ones that linger in the minds of detectives long after retirement, that surface in late-night conversations, that force even hardened investigators to admit three words they hate to say: "We don't know." Tonight's case is one of those mysteries. It began as an ordinary missing person investigation in a quiet town where doors were rarely locked and neighbors knew one another by name. By the time it ended, entire careers had been destroyed. Witnesses had changed their stories. Evidence had appeared where none should have existed. And one disturbing detail would convince many that whatever happened that night had never truly stopped happening. More than 40 years later, investigators still cannot explain it. Some believe they know exactly who was responsible. Others insist the truth lies beyond conventional understanding. But everyone agrees on one thing: if even half of the evidence is genuine, this may be the most chilling unsolved mystery ever recorded. Pause. This is the story of Blackwood House, and the family that vanished without a trace. In the autumn of 1982, the small town of Ashmore Ridge seemed untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, the town had a population of fewer than 2,000 people. Nothing remarkable ever happened there. The local newspaper reported lost pets, school fundraisers, and weather updates. Violent crime was virtually non-existent. Residents often described Ashmore Ridge using the same phrase: safe. Among those residents were the Harrow family. Thomas Harrow, 46, taught history at the local high school. His wife, Eleanor, worked part-time at the town library. Their daughter, Lucy, was 14. Their son, Benjamin, had just turned 9. To outsiders, they appeared ordinary, predictable, routine. Neighbors recalled seeing Thomas washing his truck every Saturday morning, Eleanor tending roses in the front garden, Lucy riding her bicycle through town with friends, Benjamin chasing fireflies during summer evenings. Nothing about them suggested they would become the center of one of the strangest investigations in modern history. Then came October 17th, the day everything changed. It started with a missed appointment. Eleanor never arrived for her shift at the library. At first, co-workers assumed she had fallen ill. When repeated phone calls went unanswered, concern began to spread. By evening, Thomas had also failed to appear at an important school meeting. Neighbors grew uneasy. Around 7:45 p.m., a family friend drove to Blackwood House. The front door stood slightly open. The porch light flickered. Inside, silence. Dinner sat untouched on the dining room table, for plates had been carefully prepared. Steam no longer rose from the food, but the meal hadn't yet spoiled. Pot remained on the stove. The television played static in the living room. Lucy's schoolbooks were spread across the sofa. Benjamin's toy train circled endlessly along its track. The family dog remained inside, hungry, agitated. Yet there was no sign of the Harrows. No straggle. No blood. No note. No indication they had planned to leave. It looked as though 4 people had simply stood up in the middle of an ordinary evening and ceased to exist. Pause. Then investigators discovered the first impossible clue. Every clock inside Blackwood House had stopped. Not approximately. Not within minutes of one another. Exactly. Kitchen clock. Bedroom alarm. Wristwatch left on the bathroom counter. Even the decorative grandfather clock that had not worked in years. All displayed the same time, 8:17 p.m. Local authorities initially suspected foul play. State investigators arrived within days. Search teams combed the surrounding forests. Dogs tracked scents leading away from the house, only for those trails to end abruptly in an open field nearly 2 miles away. No footprints. No tire marks. Nothing. Detective Alan Mercer later wrote, "We were investigating an event that had left evidence everywhere and nowhere at the same time." Witness interviews deepened the mystery. One neighbor reported hearing laughter shortly before 8 p.m. Another claimed the Harrow home had gone completely dark moments later. An elderly resident insisted she saw figures standing motionless near the upstairs windows, watching the street. But when she waved, none of them moved. Investigators dismissed the testimony as unreliable, until they discovered she had accurately described clothing recovered inside the house that had never been publicly disclosed. Then came the photographs. Crime scene technicians documented every room. Weeks later, while reviewing developed images, an analyst noticed something strange. In several photographs taken hours apart, a blurred figure appeared in the background, near doorways, reflected in mirrors, standing at the end of hallways. The shape resembled a person, tall, thin, head slightly tilted. It had not been visible to investigators while the photographs were taken. Experts argued over defects in film processing, double exposure, human error. Yet no explanation accounted for why the figure appeared. The country, different states, different years, different victims. At first glance, the collection appeared to be nothing more than an odd hobby, until investigators noticed the similarities. Every case involved entire households disappearing without warning, meals left unfinished, personal belongings abandoned, no signs of violence. And in each case, witnesses reported clocks malfunctioning shortly before the disappearances. One article described a family in Oregon who vanished in 1959 after neighbors heard laughter coming from an empty house. Another documented a couple in Maine whose radio continued playing long after they were gone. A third referenced an abandoned farmhouse in Kansas where investigators discovered every clock frozen at exactly 8:17 p.m., the same time displayed throughout Blackwood House. Thomas had circled those reports in red ink. In the margins, he had written a single question. How many? Nobody knew why. Had he been researching the cases? Obsessing over them? Trying to warn someone? Or had he known something investigators did not? The discovery changed everything. Thomas Harrow transformed overnight from victim to possible suspect. Pause. But the second twist would make that theory far more complicated. Nearly 6 months after the Harrows vanished, Detective Mercer received an anonymous package. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside was a cassette tape. The label read only, "Play alone." Mercer ignored the instruction. 3 investigators listened together. At first, the recording contained nothing except static. Then came the voices. A woman humming, a child laughing, the clink of silverware. Someone asking, "Can you pass the potatoes?" The room fell silent. Mercer later stated that every hair on his arms stood upright, because he recognized the voices. It sounded exactly like the Harrow family. The recording captured what appeared to be their final dinner. For nearly 4 minutes, the conversation remained ordinary. Benjamin talking excitedly about school, Lucy complaining about homework, Thomas discussing a history assignment, Eleanor reminding everyone to finish their vegetables. Then the tape changed. There was a pause. A chair scraped against the floor. Eleanor asked softly, "Who is standing outside?" Nobody answered. Benjamin whispered, "Mom." Lucy said, "I thought Dad invited him." Thomas responded immediately. No one moved. Several seconds passed. Then another voice entered the recording. Calm, unfamiliar, close enough to suggest it was standing inside the dining room. The voice said, "You've noticed me." Screaming erupted. The tape ended. Experts spent years analyzing the audio. Some insisted it was an elaborate hoax. Others argued no evidence of editing existed. Voice comparison technology available decades later failed to identify the unknown speaker. The origin of the cassette remains unknown. It arrived without explanation, and no one ever claimed responsibility. By now, national media had descended upon Ashmore Ridge. The story dominated headlines. Psychics volunteered their services. Amateur investigators flooded the town. Conspiracy theories multiplied. Then, 2 years after the disappearance, Blackwood House was scheduled for demolition. Before the work began, investigators conducted one final sweep. In Lucy Harrow's bedroom closet, hidden behind loose wooden panels, they discovered something extraordinary. A diary. Lucy had apparently been writing in secret. Most entries reflected normal teenage concerns. Friends, school, arguments with her parents. Then the tone shifted. Entries became fragmented, fearful. She repeatedly mentioned the man in the hallway. At first, investigators assumed she referred to someone real, perhaps an intruder, but the descriptions became increasingly disturbing. He stands where the light doesn't reach. Mom says I dreamed him. Ben says he hears him breathing at night. Dad keeps asking questions about the other families. Then came the final entry, written 3 days before the disappearance. He told me not to write this. He said people only notice him when it's too late. Dad thinks he found a pattern. If the clocks stop again, we aren't supposed to answer the door. The last line appeared rushed, as if written in panic. I don't think he's outside anymore. Investigators never determined whether Lucy had fabricated the entries, whether she suffered from stress-induced hallucinations, or whether she had documented something no one else could explain. More than 4 decades later, 3 primary theories continue to dominate discussions surrounding the Blackwood House mystery. The simplest explanation suggests Thomas Harrow orchestrated everything. Perhaps he became obsessed with historical disappearances. Perhaps he suffered a psychological break. Supporters argue the newspaper collection indicates prior knowledge. The hidden compartment suggests secrecy. Yet enormous problems remain. No financial motive emerged. No evidence of planning existed. No trace of the family was ever found. And no explanation accounts for the cassette tape's unknown voice, or the identical details shared with cases spanning decades before Thomas began collecting articles. Some psychologists believe Ashmore Ridge became trapped in collective delusion. Memories changed through suggestion. Witnesses influenced one another. Fear distorted perception. The photographs, diary, and audio recording may have been interpreted through the lens of trauma.
Humans naturalis sac patterns.
Especially when confronted with tragedy. Yet this theory struggles against physical evidence. The stopped clocks, the anonymous cassette, the hidden research, the consistent reports emerging from unrelated locations years apart. Coincidence alone seems insufficient. This theory remains the most controversial. It proposes that certain events resist conventional understanding. Something unknown, unidentified, operating according to rules humanity has not yet recognized. Supporters point to recurring details. The clocks, the unfinished meals, the witnesses describing someone who should not have been there, the sensation of being observed. They argue these similarities suggest a phenomenon rather than a perpetrator. Critics dismiss such claims as superstition, a surrender of reason, and perhaps they are right, but reason has never solved the case. Ashmore Ridge never recovered. Families moved away, businesses closed, Blackwood House was demolished. Yet residents continue to report strange experiences. Visitors claim their watches lose time. Tourists describe hearing laughter near the empty lot after sunset. Several former investigators admitted they avoided discussing the case with loved ones, not because they feared ridicule, but because revisiting the evidence left them deeply unsettled. Detective Mercer rarely granted interviews during retirement. When he finally spoke publicly decades later, the interviewer asked whether he regretted working the case. Mercer stared silently for several moments before answering. "I regret believing mysteries end." He never elaborated. In 2024, while digitizing archived evidence, a technician reviewed Blackwood House photographs using modern enhancement software. Thousands of people had examined those images before. Nothing new was expected. Then the technician noticed something hidden within the reflection of a dining room window. The figure standing behind investigators. The same figure dismissed as a photographic anomaly decades earlier. Enhanced frame by frame, the shape appeared clearer than ever before. It wasn't facing the camera. It wasn't facing the investigators. It appeared to be looking directly into the Harrow family's empty seats at the dinner table. And in the reflection beside it, sat 4 faint silhouettes. as though the family had never left, as though someone or something had been watching them all along. Investigators cannot determine whether the enhancement revealed genuine detail or digital artifact. The image remains under review, but one question refuses to disappear. If the Harrows vanished that night, who was sitting at the table? Pause. Perhaps the truth lies buried beneath decades of misinformation and fear. Perhaps an ordinary human monster escaped justice. Or perhaps there are doors in reality we occasionally open without realizing it. Doors that, once noticed, notice us back. And maybe the most terrifying possibility isn't that this mystery remains unsolved. Maybe it's that the pattern never ended. So tell us, what do you think happened inside Blackwood House? Was this the work of a killer, a shared delusion, or evidence that some mysteries exist beyond explanation? Leave your theories in the comments below. If this case unsettled you, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next mystery waiting in the archives may be even darker. And somewhere tonight, someone may glance at the clock, watch it stop, and remember this story, because the most chilling unsolved mystery ever recorded might still be unfolding.